Hello. Okay, things are hotting up now. In the last clip, where it was very late, we managed to get the clutch buttoned up. So, it's getting exciting. Nearly ready for the gearbox to go back on. Off camera, I put the mounts back on. Possibly the right way around. We'll see. Now we're going to do the transmission brake. And I just thought I'd do a quick little bit about transmission brakes. So, on a Land Rover, well, let's start with our normal car. What you have is your handbrake acts upon something on the rear drums, or the 2CV is the fronts, but there's either a separate arm inside the drum or on the caliper which will push the shoes out mechanically, or the pistons out mechanically, and lock your rear wheels. Great. Land Rover has a different design, which is transmission brake. So instead of having anything on the rears, so your rears are normal brakes, same as fronts, what you've got is another one. So another basic drum brake, which we're going to have to come back later and change the shoes on because there was a weep from that seal. This is incidentally why most offenders don't have a working handbrake and series vehicles. But via a mechanical linkage, basically you pull the handbrake up there in the cab, which pulls, oh, I can do this, there you go, on this rod. Can you see that? Forces those shoes out. Easy. And it basically acts as, well, it's a transmission brake. It acts on the transmission, so it brakes the transmission. Negative side of it is that due to differentials and things, if you jack up one wheel, technically you could roll back. But there we are. So it's all pretty straightforward. Basically, it's back plate straight onto the speedo drive housing. Then that all bolts on, and then we have. I'll tell you what, let's do that. So that sits there. This little plate that's quite tight on the threads goes on top. Normal drum goes over that, and then that's your output drive shaft flange. So that goes in there, and that goes onto your prop. As we discussed, obviously series vehicles are usually rear wheel drive, so your normal drive goes onto there. The bolts on that are sort of captive as well. Then big castellated nut goes on there, secured with a circlip. That's it really. There's also a little seal, I think, that I need to wedge somewhere, but yeah, easy as that really. And we've got big, castellated nuts, for those of you of a more modern car perversion. It's a nut that looks like a castle. And come here for a second. So yes, castellated nut. Looks like a castle. Why is that, I hear you cry? Well, when you wind it onto a thread that's designed for one, I just realised I've done this, and it's going to be very hard to see. But anyway, there's a hole drilled through the end of the shaft that you can then push a split pin or a cotter pin through, and that will stop it coming undone. It does rather muck up torque settings, because if you can do it with the right torque, but if that hole doesn't then line up with the castellations, there you go, there's the hole. Obviously if that hole doesn't line up with the castellations, you need to then undo it or do it up slightly, but you know, necessary evil and all that. They're very, very good in oily areas, because obviously if you've got a nut that's bathing in oil, haha, jokes about all nuts in Land Rovers bathe in oil. There's a train of thought that says that oil can affect either the nylon inside a locking nut or Loctite. Or Loctite won't work if the threads are oily, but it's probably rubbish, isn't it? So yeah, there we go. I'll get this assembled. The reason that cover is still off is because I think we're going to assemble the entire thing, put it on the ground, and then I can use, well, I can either use the handbrake to hold everything still, or I can just use the fact the wheels are on the ground, torque it up to 60 pound-feet, and then knock the, or pull the little locking tabs over. Yeah, so there we are, we'll get cracking. I think the next thing will be probably a bit of film of us hopefully putting the gearbox in. Fingers crossed. So here's our setup. Toolbox is underneath. We've lined the back of the engine up close. We can adjust it when it's closer. I'll be happy when the chassis is around it. It can't fall off. We've got our clutch push rod attached with the clip. We've got the release bearing on. That's clipped on, and that's on. That's not going to fall off. We greased the end of that. Oh, one other thing you want to do. We spoke about alignment. So we spoke about alignment, very important. The other thing, pop it in drive or in any gear, because when we're sliding that on, we line those splines up in the drive plate to the splines on the first motion shaft, and we can do that with it in gear by turning that. So I know the engine's on a slight downward slope. I've got the gearbox on a slight downward slope. I mean, this is going to be impossible to film, so I think I'll just see you on the other side. Cross your fingers for me. If you've done this before, you know what a pain in the arse it is. That was a nightmare. Lining that massive great engine and transmission assembly up onto the back of an engine is a bugger. I've done it on the floor, I've done it to a 4-cylinder and the 8. It doesn't get easier. So, learn from me. If you're going to be clever and go, no Mr. Manual, I'm not going to pay attention to you, you can put an engine crane through the door. I've got a 2-post lift. It doesn't really make it easier, just ignore it. Just do it separately. I will not be doing that again, it was a nightmare. So what I will be doing from now on is Land Rover nice and high, transmission jack, just the gearbox. Where are we? You can't really see it now, the crossmember's in the way. But all that stuff I went on about, nicely silhouetted. All that stuff I went on about with assembling the transfer box, do it on the car. Just do it on the car, put the gearbox on, line it up easily, and then build the transfer box on with everything up in the air. That'll be a million times easier. So, anyway, I'll probably time lapse all this because you've seen it all come off probably. Two things we are going to do though. We can now do up that one, and in the darkness we'll do up that one because we can use the engine to hold the transmission still for us. And it's not tight. I think they're both 65 foot-pounds, something like that. One thing that did occur to me is that some people may not have used a fill plug before, so ignore that. That's where I'll just pull the last bottle out. So a fill plug basically gives you your level while you fill it until oil starts to pour out. These comma bottles are excellent, and the little tube built in the top. When you're done, that just pushes back down. So essentially what you do I could actually fill this from above, but I wanted this to be one of the first jobs because it's also probably one of the most forgotten. The last thing I want to do after all this work is not put oil in the transfer box or gearbox. Interesting though, if you notice, hey, you know what the inside of that looks like now. Look how little oil it actually takes. And they don't fail. That different sump I've got on this than standard is one for rigidity, because they're pressed steel as standard, and if anyone's tried to seal an engine with anything pressed steel really, the second you ever tighten it, it will never seal again. Because the bolts bend. So imagine this is pressed steel. This is pressed, imagine this were pressed steel as well. If you ever tighten that, even by a bit, you bend that section of the sump, and that will never seal again after that. Which is why I changed it. I suppose you could, there's a bit of cooling in the fins as well, but that really makes any difference. Maybe if you're towing. Off the top of my head, on a series Land Rover, I think the main gearbox is 3 litres. That's brake fluid, don't be brake fluid. And the transfer box is 1.5, possibly. So we should be there, pretty much. Oh, I don't want to block the money shot after all this. What have I done with a fill plug? This is the same as most manual transmissions, even in more modern cars. They've always been like this. Autos are the ones where you have to jump up and down in a T-box and sing Jerusalem with one leg on your head, one leg on a sparrow, and one leg on the gear selector whilst holding the brake. Go through the gears 47 times and then fill it with beer? I don't know. Yeah, autos are a pain, but much nicer, because who wants to change gear? Anyone watch Tasty Classics? He's good, isn't he? That Panhard was fantastic. His welding was pretty swift as well. But he's great. I like him. Very amusing. One of the few channels my wife will watch. It really is astounding. This stuff can even leak, isn't it? I mean, how big do the clearances have to get before this will leak? Hold on. Is it real? It's happened. Dun 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 dun. Transfer box is full. No! Apologies for the grainy images, but you joined me from the back of a very hot engine. So I've just done the first run up. As I was saying, I've just done the first run up. Really good. We're not back on the wheels yet. I will try and video the actual back on the wheels. We can see clutch all good. We can put it into gear. We can change gear. We're not in gear while sitting still, so the adjustment's all good. I'll just run it up to get it nice and warm. And one thing I'm quite pleased about, no more leaks. I'm really sorry, it's very hard to get decent light in here. No more leaks from the back of the engine. We do though have an interesting one down here. Now I don't know whether this cap is standard. I don't know whether it's series 3 or what, but I think it also be a breather possibly. Problem is this looks like a sieve, and that seal is not in the seal kit. as you can see from there, basically, as the engine runs, see that? You can quite see, as the gears spin, it basically throw oil up here and sprays on the back of that. That O-ring is obviously completely useless, and so is this stupid sprung bit of metal, hoping to attach it, and it leaks. That seal's not in the kit, so we're going to clean it up. I think all I can think to do really is seal it on. The breather is in the centre, so that shouldn't make any odds. So at the moment, so we've got all our electrics all back together. I'm going to seal that back on and really just put the interior back together. Then, sadly, before we got a test drive, we have a Range Rover to fix.